Hey folks, today's video is about making buckskin. I got an email from a friend of mine that I met at Mark Humpel's November brain tan weekend that we go to every year. And I had been explaining to him and some of the other participants how I have pretty much stopped using brains to make brain tan, which I guess you could now call it buckskin, oil tanned leather, or aldehyde leather, which is a distinction that I can get into at another point, and I'll leave some links in the description for this video for some resources that would better explain some of the chemistry and mechanisms to what's going on. But this email was basically asking me what my basic recipe is for doing buckskin the way I've been doing it. So that's what today's video is going to be about. So I've assembled the ingredients that we're going to need to do this. I'm doing this inside because it was too windy and you couldn't hear anything I was saying. So let's just jump into this. So what I've got is my oil. No matter how you do buckskin, it's always an oil of some kind. Brains have oil in it. You can use eggs, which have certain components that are similar to what's in oil, and you can use oil. Preferably you need to use a not solid oil, a soft oil. You know, you can use olive oil. This happens to be bear oil. One of the other key things that isn't really discussed in much of the literature that I've read is that one of the key details about this oil is it works better if the oil is oxidized, which means that it gets to a point where it's actually not healthy to eat because it's gone rancid. When I say rancid, I don't mean it's foul, like to the point of rot, but this bear oil has a distinct odor that you can definitely tell is off. It's definitely not something you want to put in your body. And the reason we do that, and this goes to the aldehyde tanning detail, is that when the oils oxidize, they create new chemicals and new compounds that are basically doing the work of the tanning. Yes, there are lubricants in the oil and in the soap that we'll be using, but it really comes down to these chemicals called aldehydes, and it's similar to formaldehyde. This aldehyde is a little different than formaldehyde, but through the oxidation of the oil, you create aldehydes, and it's the aldehydes that are really doing the strong work of making the leather, making the skin leather. So what we need to do is get the oil into water. What we know is that oil and water don't mix, so we need something to facilitate getting the oil to mix in with the water, and that's what an emulsifier does. And in the situation with brains have a natural emulsifying agent in them, so that when we blend them in with the water, they automatically emulsify the oils that are naturally in the brain into the water, so that it makes the oil useful to tanning the leather. In this case, we have to create an emulsion. So what I tend to use is soap, and you can use a few different types of soap. Really, any soap will work. This is Fell's Naphtha soap, which I shred using one of these drywall shredders into hot water. It needs to be hot water or else it won't dissolve. About a quarter of this bar would do a batch of brains, or a batch of hides, one hide. I tend to use Murphy's oil soap because it's already liquid, it's easier to dissolve. The other emulsifying agent, which isn't soap at all, is lecithin, which most people know is an emulsifying agent. In the case of tanning, you would take about a quarter of a cup of these lecithin granules. These are soy lecithin granules. Lecithin granules, dissolve them in hot water until it's completely dissolved, and then add about a quarter cup of oil. That's going to be our recipe anyway. Is a quarter cup of oxidized rancid oil to a quarter cup of either soap or the lecithin. I tend to like the soap best just because of the way it emulsifies the oils, and in my different trials that I've done, the resulting leather that I get is superb. So I don't always measure my ingredients, but for today's purposes, we will. The other good thing about this recipe is if you have any family members who are squeamish about you using brains, this is just soap and water, or soap and oil. So there's really nothing to turn anyone off. So what I've got here is, this is some hot water. We're going to be adding this to some hot water anyway. I'm not going to measure out the oil. I measured out the soap, but we're going to put in probably 3 of these big spoonfuls. I'm just going to kind of gently stir it up. This water's pretty hot, so it should dissolve pretty well. But I'm also going to shake this up. The other thing emulsions need is some kind of agitation. We're going to mix this up later once we're done, once we add it into some water. But we're going to shake this mason jar up first, and what we're going to end up with is something that looks kind of like mayonnaise, which, you know anything about mayonnaise, it really isn't much different anyway. And some people, even to that fact, have tanned leather with mayonnaise because it has eggs and oil in it. So, as you can see, I'm leaking a little bit, but it's pretty. This will do for what we need. So what I've got here is some hot water. Since I am doing this inside, I went ahead and used the stove. As you can see, I typically do this on a fire. So I'm going to take the hot water and add it to my bucket. I might end up only using half of that because it's pretty hot. You don't want it too hot. Any of you who've done tanning before, you know. So that's our mixture. So you know that you don't want to use water on your deer hide that you couldn't put your own hands in. If it's too hot for your skin, it's too hot for the skin you're working with. So we've got the soap and oil mixture into the hot water. Now we're going to take our drill with some kind of paint mixer. This is just a regular paint mixer from the hardware store. And this is going to further emulsify the oil into the water. What that's doing is it's providing some of that agitation I talked about to create the emulsion. This is now fully mixed and ready to be used. This probably has enough, this definitely has enough for 1, but it probably has enough for 2 smallish skins. But definitely enough for a full-size deer hide. Okay, I added a little more water because I wanted it a little fuller. Now, no, don't forget about the temperature thing. Even though once we add the hide into the bath, the hide's most likely going to steal some of the heat because this is kind of chilled, and it will cool off the solution. But if it's too hot to begin with, it could still cook the hide, which you don't want. It'll start turning the hide into glue, but only in certain spots, and you'll end up with weak holes and tears, and then you've lost your hide. You might as well finish the job and turn it into glue. So I'm going to go ahead and add this in. One thing that I often do is I get this into the solution, I get it nice and mixed in, let the hide really soak up the oil. Then sometimes what I'll do is if the solution seems to have gotten very lukewarm to cool, I might take some of the solution, heat it back up, take the hide out, add the hot water to the solution to reheat it because the hide absorbs the solution a lot better if the water's warm. Okay, I just wanted to show you the way this hide is moving. You know, I wish you could touch this. This hide is already taking on the oil and soap mixture. You can feel how loose this hide has become, which says to me that it's really taking on the solution. So the point of today's video wasn't to do a full buckskin tutorial. There are lots of better videos on all of the prep work involved. I mean, getting to this point of a deer hide to where it will actually take up the solution is just as big a project as this has been. This was really just to go over my recipe, which has been getting me excellent results. The second tip that goes along with this that makes my job easier as a tanner and creates some really excellent leather is something I call the triple dip. I didn't come up with it. I found it on a forum website called Paleo Planet. Someone discussed the way they tan their deer hides is typically the goal would be to soak this once, wring it out, start drying it and doing all of the stretching and working that's involved with making buckskin, and have it work out the first time. That rarely happens. Certainly rarely for me does that happen. In my current technique, the way I do it is I soak this for, I could wring it out now if I wanted to and let it dry and then re-soak it. What I end up doing is I do that 3 times. So I can leave this in for a couple of hours or overnight. The next time I work this, I'll wring it dry. I'll hang it. I won't stretch it. I'll just hang it somewhere warm, sometimes with some wind blowing on it, and I'll let it dry completely. Then I'll heat up my solution again, dip the hide back into the solution, then I'll do it all over again. I'll pull it out, wring it, hang it to dry. On the 3rd try, when I wring it out before I dry, that's when I work it. I work it to softness on the 3rd, after the 3rd dip. Call that the triple dip. Pretty much every time I do that, I end up with perfect buckskin. I think what happens is you can't predict how well the hide is going to fully absorb the solution. And there's such a mild amount of actual oil in here that after 3 dips, I've never had a sense that I overdid the oil. They come out super soft and they come out much easier to soften, which is another thing that's important to me, especially as I get older. My joints don't like all of the stretching and pushing and pulling that are required to make buckskin. With this recipe, with the oil and soap, and then the triple dip technique has changed the outcome of my leather immensely. So here's a few examples of some of the leather I've been making with this technique. It's hard to translate in video, but these were smoked. These were smoked and then dyed with black walnut. One final note that I'll leave you with regard to oil tannage and aniline tannage is one of the things that I've discovered in my research is that the reason when you do Braintan Buckskin, you always smoke the hides. We were always taught that it keeps them from drying hard when they get wet. Well, one of the other reasons is that the creation of smoke by burning things also creates the same aldehydes that are created during the oxidation of the oils. So by smoking the deer hides, you are adding additional aldehyde to create a fuller tan or a fuller softening of the deer hide. In fact, those aldehydes are actually water soluble, so that if you were to smoke your deer hides in between those brainings or in between those dips in the oil solution, the aldehydes in the smoke that are now on the deer hide, when you put it back into the solution, will dissolve and allow the deer hide to absorb the aldehydes even more completely. And then when you're finally finished softening it, you put that last touch of the smoke on there and you've sealed in the softness so that no matter what we do to this, it'll always be leather. I can never get this back to rawhide. I hope this was helpful. I may do some more hide related videos, probably some on my black walnut techniques. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section. Otherwise, see ya.